Unions and social movements that integrate the strike committee once again took to the streets of Colombia to protest against the government of President Iván Duque and to demand the negotiation of the list of demands after 36 days of strike. In Russia, the Senate approved the nation's exit from the aerial surveillance or open skies treaty. In Iran, the largest cargo vessel on the Navy sank on Wednesday off the southern port city of Yazd. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Unions and social movements that integrate the strike committee once again took to the streets of Colombia to protest against the government of President Iván Duque and to demand the negotiation of the list of demands after 36 days of strike. The mobilizations are motivated by the popular discontent after the government again refused to fulfill the pre-agreement established with the stalemate committee to advance in the negotiation table. Social sectors lifted the roadblocks in at least 40 points where they maintained resistance in the country in order to contribute to the dialogue. However, the measure was not accepted by the government of President Duque, who demands a 100% release. In view of this scenario, social organizations denounced the scars of commitment of the government to seek a solution to the crisis, and also announced that they will remain in the streets until security guarantees are not achieved. The Venezuelan military released new videos depicting the return of 8 soldiers rescued from captivity. Venezuela's defense minister, General Vladimir Padrino, welcomes the group at a military base in the northwestern federal state of Táchira. They had been abducted by a Colombian armed group and rescued by units of the Bolivarian National Armed Force at an undisclosed location in the state of Apure, bordering Colombia, where Venezuelan troops have been fighting Colombian irregulars. The successful rescue operation was dubbed Centennial Hawk. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, authorities warned citizens about vulnerability due to hurricane season. The Caribbean country's meteorological services warned that after the eruption of the La Soufrière volcano, the island could be entering the hurricane season somehow vulnerable, due to the fact that shelters are still occupied with victims of the volcano eruption. For her part, the director of the National Emergency Management Organization, Michelle Forbes, said that authorities are identifying additional shelters to be prepared for possible storms. The hurricane season in the Atlantic begins on June 1st and ends at the end of November. The Deputy Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Montgomery Daniel, warned that more than 3,000 evacuees remain in emergency shelters following the volcano eruption. Daniel advised families to take shelter with relatives before the hurricane season starts so that facilities don't collapse. He also warned that coronavirus is spreading in emergency shelters and called for more effective preventive measures. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele vowed on Tuesday night that he will keep both left and right-wing parties away from power. In a speech before Parliament on his second anniversary in office, Bukele accused the traditional political parties of plundering the country and said he will not allow setbacks that will take the country back into crime and poverty. Bukele has been implementing neoliberal policies under an anti-corruption banner. He now controls not only the executive branch, but also the Congress and judiciary, following a landslide victory of his New Ideas Party in parliamentary elections this past April. In his first day in office, the newly elected Congress dismissed Supreme Court magistrates and the Attorney General, to be replaced by Bukele's followers. Accused of authoritarianism, Bukele said the seconds were the will of the people.
We swear to defend our future conquests, not to let those who made us suffer ever to return to power, not to let them plunder our homeland again. From now on, the challenge is much greater. Salvadorans have to decide to free ourselves from the grip of the de facto powers that with their ideological apparatus have always governed from behind and continue to try to govern our country.
Peru's interior minister has banned election campaign closing rallies ahead of the presidential runoff to be held on Sunday due to the COVID-19 epidemic. Both candidates, leftist Pedro Castillo and far-right Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of former dictator Alberto Fujimori, were planning to hold their campaign closing events on Friday. However, the mayor of Lima, Jorge Muñoz, warned of the possibility of granting permits for public acts that gather a large number of people due to the measures to fight the coronavirus. The Deputy Minister of Internal Order of the Interior Minister, Carlos León, told local reporters that according to legal regulations regarding the health crisis, it is not possible for the authorities to grant permission to hold rallies, as requested by the different parties. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Russia, the Senate approved on Wednesday the nation's exit from the aerial surveillance or open skies treaty. Russia decided to leave the agreement after the United States abandoned it unilaterally in 2020. The bill was passed by the lower house on May 19th and received unanimous support from Russian senators. In force since 2002, the Open Skies Treaty, which still brings together 31 European countries plus Turkey and Canada, allows military observers to carry out aerial surveillance flights to inspect troop and ship movements over a vast territory from the Canadian city of Vancouver to the port of Vladivostok in the Russian forest.
The Federation put forward a concrete proposal about maintaining the viability of the treaty, allowing surveillance flights over military facilities, and informed participants of other countries on the necessity of assurances about non-transfer information about observation flights to third-party states, considering that our partners refused it, that they weren't ready for reciprocal steps, and considering the necessity for providing national security, the Russian Federation took the decision about the exit from the treaty.
And Russia assured on Tuesday that it will maintain the agreement on the transit of Russian gas to Europe through Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov claimed that Russia and Ukraine have a treaty on the transit of gas to Europe, which will continue to be observed for as long as it is in force. At the same time, confirmed that Moscow has no intention of leaving Ukrainian transit. Peskov also informed the Russian President Vladimir Putin foresee that the volumes of gas supplied to Europe will increase in the future. In the United States, the Biden administration suspended oil and gas leases in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Sanctuary, reversing a drilling program approved by former President Donald Trump. The decision revived a political row over the U.S. possession on the Bering Strait that is home to polar bears and other wildlife and has reached reserve of oil. The order by Interior Secretary Deb Haaland follows a temporary suspension of oil and gas lease activities adopted by President Joe Biden on his first day in office. For several years, Republicans and the oil industry have been trying to open up the oil-rich refuge for drilling. Some Democratic Congress people, environmental groups, and Alaska Native tribes have struggled to obtain a permanent block and a protection for the reserve. The former International Monetary Fund chief, Rodrigo Rato, will stand trial in Spain, facing corruption, money laundering, and tax dodging charges. Rodrigo Rato, who was found guilty in 2018 of embezzlement over the misuse of Bankia credit cards, as in a semi-release stage after serving half of a fund and half-year jail term. Last year, he was acquitted in a separate fraud trial over the listing of a bank in 2012. A judge from the Madrid court decided to initiate oral proceedings against Rato. Police are further investigating where the conservative politician's substantial financial assets came from. And we remain in Spain. The leader of the Polisario Front, Brahim Ghali, was transferred to Algeria on a flight after recovering from COVID-19. According to local media, Ghali was transferred in a medical aircraft from the airport of Pamplona and arrived in Algiers successfully after a judge ruled out imposing precautionary measures. The president of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic spent more than a month in the hospital San Pedro de Logroño, where he was admitted on April 18th for COVID-19 and was discharged from the health center this Tuesday at about 10 p.m. local time. Brahim Ghali has vindicated through his office his decision to cooperate with the Spanish justice and has responded to the questions that the Spanish National Audience has formulated to him before false accusations of torture and violation of human rights. Egypt rejects Ethiopian Prime Minister's statements on building 100 dams within a year on the Nile River. Egypt affirmed on Tuesday that the statements of the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on the construction of 100 new dams in his country violate international law and demonstrate that the authorities of Addis Ababa advances malicious transactions with the Nile and other international rivers. Ethiopia plans to hold 13.5 billion cubic meters of water during the second filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dams Reservoir in July, despite the objections of downstream countries Egypt and Sudan over the move in absence of a legally binding agreement. In the Caribbean island of Grenada, authorities announced the issue of vaccination cards to facilitate mobility and economic recovery following the entire population's immunization. Grenadian vaccination cards will resemble personal IDs, such as driving licenses, and will be issued only after full 2 jab doses are applied.
Are expected to verify their vaccination status, and yes, with vaccination cards, and there will be additional verification that we have, because we have a database of all persons who have been vaccinated, just in case somebody attempts to forge a vaccination card. And we are also looking at, and hopefully within the next day or two, to be able to roll out additional forms of vaccine verification, which would be in the form of a picture ID vaccination card that is similar to your driver's license, and or a vaccination app that will be available so persons can use for here in Grenada as well as when they're traveling abroad.
All right. To be considered fully vaccinated, you must have received the second dose of your 2-dose regimen of a vaccine, 2 doses such as the AstraZeneca that we are offering, or the Pfizer or Moderna or so on, at least 14 days or at least 2 weeks prior. So it's 2 weeks after your second dose of a 2-dose vaccine, or 2 weeks after receiving your single shot of a single dose vaccine, such as the Janssen vaccine.
And the world's 5 major emerging economies urged the waiving of coronavirus vaccine patents. Meeting via video conference, the foreign ministers of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the BRICS group, supported an Indian-South African initiative before the World Trade Organization to release intellectual property rights on vaccines to facilitate mass production in developing countries. A move initially resisted by the transnational pharmaceutical corporations backed by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. U.S. President Joe Biden recently reversed his country's stand, and it now supports the waiver. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. In Iran, the largest cargo vessel in the Iranian Navy sank on Wednesday off the southern port city of Yazd. All 400 crew members were rescued. A blaze coming from the engine of the support vessel Iris Khan could not be extinguished after a 20-hour firefight, the Iranian Navy reported. The ship sank in the Gulf of Oman near the strategic Strait of Hormuz, leading to the Persian Gulf. The fire, which according to the Navy started at the vessel's engine room, gradually spread out of control and engulfed the ship. A Navy spokesperson said the cause of the fire was still under investigation. The Iris car had been in service for 40 years, was used for both logistical and training services. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said on Wednesday that the nation's main issues with the U.S. have been resolved. Negotiations in Vienna have been underway since April to return Washington to the nuclear deal agreement and lift sanctions on Tehran, while also bringing Iran back into compliance with nuclear commitments it dropped in response to the U.S. unilateral sanctions.
Our main issues with the U.S. have been resolved during negotiations, with just some minor issues remaining that we will negotiate on and produce results. If there is the will that this be done in the current administration, then this administration has finished the work.
And Damascus claims that the recently concluded successful presidential elections are an important step towards strengthening internal stability in Syria, an objective that clashes with the refusal of Washington and its European allies, who in addition to maintaining the economic blockade, insist on describing the elections as illegal in order to undermine stability in the Arab country. Our correspondent Hisham Wanus has more.
Following the re-election of President Bashar al-Assad, the European Union announced its decision to maintain its sanctions imposed on the Syrian government for one more year until June 1st, 2022. In response, the Syrian Foreign Ministry, in addition to condemning the decision as inhumane, said that just as the Syrian people and their army succeeded in defeating terrorism and its supporters through their massive turnout at the polls, they are now more determined to thwart any attempt to external pressure or interference in their internal affairs.
We denounce that the decision to prolong the sanctions regime imposed on the Syrian people represents an act of genocide against the Syrian people, and we stress that the Syrian people, in spite of all the pressures, will not give up the right to self-determination and have massively demonstrated it in the presidential elections by deciding that President Bashar al-Assad is their only leader.
According to several U.S. officials who illegally entered the region of Al Jazeera in northern Syria, the United States claimed that in addition to maintaining the so-called Caesar Sanctions Act, it does not consider President al-Assad as a partner, since in its opinion the elections were neither free nor fair. Damascus denounces these as hostile statements, which show that Washington is disconnected from reality.
The stand of Western countries, led by the United States, shows that they deliberately ignore the massive participation of the Syrian people in the presidential elections and prove that they seek to prolong the war to serve their interests without caring about the suffering they cause to Syrian people in a serious violation of their sovereignty and independence, as well as of international laws.
Only the Syrians legitimize or not the presidential elections, and not the declaration of some Western officials full of fallacies and lies who claim democracy while imposing unilateral sanctions, occupying other people's lands and stealing their resources. That is what Damascus says in rejection of all the European and American attempts to sully the independence of the Syrian national decision.
On Wednesday, Isaac Herzog became Israel's 11th president after securing 87 votes among the 120 members of parliament. Herzog will succeed Reuven Rivlin, who leaves office next month at the end of the 7-year term. The executive is a former head of Israel's Labour Party and opposition leader who unsuccessfully ran against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the 2015 parliamentary elections. Herzog's father was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations before being elected president from 1983 to 1993. The soon-to-be head of state defeated Miriam Peretz, an educator who lost 2 sons in Israel's wars. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.